Alright, welcome back everybody. Sorry for that absolute cheesy thanks for the view, see you in a few thing that hit me and I felt kind of like an idiot. So anyway, moving on to our JavaScript plugin that we're going to write. I'm going to just add a JavaScript file. It's going to call it jQuery.rotator.js. It's Rotator. It's good to keep consistent names with your jQuery plugins. In this case, I'm naming it jQuery.rotator. That way you know it's a jQuery plugin. And it's easier to identify when you're inside your file explorer. So we are going to use we could use a jQuery plugin boilerplate, since this is going to use as a baseline for this plugin. But since this is going to be a very simplistic jQuery plugin, we're going to just write it all by scratch without using a boilerplate. When you start off writing your plugin, I would always recommend adding a semicolon in there, just in case the file before this, like if this is ever minified and thrown into a plugins.js or something like that, you're protecting your code from being broken. Some people may not add a semicolon to the very bottom of their page, which can cause issues for us. Now, to add the namespace or the property to jQuery, you have to do $.fm.pluginName. I'm going to be passing in options. Now typically with this instance, the options aren't going to matter much, but we want to build this out so that you can customize it later on for your needs. So we're going to set our defaults so that if we don't pass in options, these will be used to fall back on. So our rotator, we're going to have a container. It's going to be the rotator wrapper, and another essentially global configuration piece that we're going to want to have is the animation duration. We're going to have that set to 1,000, which is 1 second. It's in milliseconds. And then the slide width. This would be something that we would most likely calculate out on the fly. But since all of our slides are the same width, we're in a fairly restricted space. We're just going to go ahead and set that right here. That way we don't have to store it, or we don't have to reference it a bunch of times. Okay, to merge our passed in options with our defaults. So if we don't have any options, it picks up the defaults. You have to you can use jQuery.extend and pass in your options and your defaults, and essentially it joins them together. It takes your options and then fills in with defaults when it's not present. What I like to typically do is, inside of one of these plugins, is create a variable named Elm, which is a constant reference to our current element. It's going to be one of the other things we're going to need to track on at a global level, but not keep track of publicly, is the current page index, which we're going to set to 0 initially, and then the slide count, which is 0. We'll use the slide count for to make sure if we're on the last page to go to the first page, and if we're on the first page, disable the back button, and the same with the last page. So that needs to be slide count. Now let's now I'm going to set up our standard functions. We're going to have an initialize. Now this is where I prefer to set up like my click events, my initial click events. If I have a lot of click events, I'll separate those out into a different function and refer to them, which I will do this time since just for readability. So we want to bind our click events on the pagers. I want an event for when we click the next button, and then also an event for when we clicked the previous. And then the last function I'm going to write is for making sure. So if our screen, if we're on our first slide, I don't want to display this pager, and if we're on the last slide, I don't want to show this one. So I'm going to write a function that will be executed at the end of any click event to ensure that we have the appropriate pagers displayed. I'm just going to call that toggle pager. So we have the basic skeleton layout of our jQuery plugin. Now, when we first initialize, I also need to return. So we're going to initialize our element right off the bat, even though I'm not going to do anything with Elm. So I can get rid of that and it should still work. Now, so what we need to do is we need to find out the number of slides that we have so we can set our slide count. And then we also want to resize this unordered list item that was extremely large. So this guy right here that goes off the screen. And then we need to set up our bind events. We need to call our bind events. We also want to call our pager just to ensure that the previous button doesn't show up on initial page load. So for slide count, we're going to use our main element. We're going to find our rotator wrapper, and then do that children. Dot length. What this does is that we get our container, our wrapping container. We get we get the children, which there's only one child is CUL, and then we get the next children and get the length of that. So we should be getting 3 back for that to set our slide count. Then we need to set the width of the UL. Now the reason why I'm not using a jQuery selector of UL is some people may this allows the flexibility to use divs here instead of unordered list items. It's one of those things that helps. If you keep that in mind, it allows your code to be much more flexible. I'm going to set the width. Now there are better ways to set the width. I think it's client inner width maybe, but for cross-browser compatibility and just faster code, we're going to use the jQuery set width feature. Slide width. So what we're doing here is we're using our previously captured slide count and our slide width. What we could do instead of doing this is use this selector to get all of our list item elements and get the width, get the largest width item, and use that instead of our options. Now we want to bind our events, so we want to bind our click events. We also want to toggle our pager so that it hides the previous button when we first load the page. Okay, so to get our previous and next buttons, we need to simply use elm.find. So we're going to find our previous button and do on click. We're going to execute previous. On click. I'm going to execute next. One reason why I like to keep my bind events in a separate function is I will also create an unbind event function so that we can turn all of these off. Say the user interacts with something, we want to temporarily disable them. We can just call bind events and then also call unbind events. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. In this case, we're not doing that, but just for to keep it, to maintain that consistency in my code, I like to do it. One thing we're going to add to our previous and next functions is e for the event. Do e.prevent default. What this does is that it prevents, in short, it prevents this hashtag from showing up when you click on. It's overlaying. When you click on one of these. When you click on one of those buttons, the hashtag shows up. This helps prevent that from happening. Using this prevents the default behavior of an event. You could also use return false, but that prevents any additional code from executing on it. It prevents it from bubbling up the DOM element chain, if that's the right terminology. So when a user clicks the next, we want to, first off, we want to see if we can actually go next, and we want to make sure that we want to make sure that we don't go off the page. So if our page index is greater than or equal to 0, and also our page index is less than slide count minus 1, our slide count is 1 based, so if it's a 1 based index, whereas the page index is 0 based. So 1 for the page index, the first page is 0, but our slide count starts at 1 and counts up, whereas the 0 based index starts at 0. So what we're going to do is increment our page index by using the ++ operator, and we're going to find our unordered list item, options, container, children. I'm going to use jQuery animate to perform this function. animation duration. Now inside of this piece, we can actually set what we want to animate to. Slide width. So what we are telling this to do is take the top left of our element. Take the top left of our element and move it negative 960 pixels to the left for 1 second. We could also set up various animation tweens to ensure that, or to change up the animation style. We're just going to keep it the way it is for now. So now I want to test what I have so far. I think I have to have that. We'll see. So I'm going to go back to my my HTML, and at the very bottom, right before the body tag, is how I'm going to initialize this script. So I'm going to include my JavaScript file. I'm also going to go out and get CDN version of jQuery. So I'm going to copy this. So C equals that. Now if you notice that it doesn't have the HTTP on it, what this does is that it allows it to work in both HTTP and HTTPS without getting any mixed content warnings. I'm going to set up the shorthand for document.ready and select my rotator by ID. And our defaults should work on everything. So here goes nothing. So it animates to the right. Nothing super fancy. We haven't wired up the back button yet. Now we can change the speed very quickly if we want to. It's part of using the options to change everything globally quickly without plugging up any namespaces and keeping it contained. So we need to code out our previous and our toggle pager still. So we're going to do the same e.prevent default. Now if our page index is less than or equal to our slide count, we're going to decrement our pager. And we're going to do the same that we did up here. We're going to find an unordered list item, but we're going to add, if I could, there, type correctly. We're going to add, instead of subtract, we're going to toggle pager. So what we're going to do inside our toggle pager is find our previous, we're going to find our previous and next buttons. And we're going to set up code to hide the next if we need to, then hide previous. So the condition where we would want to hide the next button is if we are on the last page. So if page index is greater than or equal to our slide count -1. We're going to do next.hide. And otherwise, we want to do next.show. And then if page index is less than or equal to 0, in case something screwy happens and we end up with like -1 for our page index. Previous hide, and then else previous show. Let's go over here, F5. So we see that immediately our rotator on the left disappears, and as we page through, the one on the right hides. Now this is a very, very bare bones example for a jQuery plugin. There are a lot of things we can do to make it more flexible. We could add a timeout so that it auto rotates. We could add randomized animations between each slide, but I think we're gonna just leave it for the way it is now, because that gets us the absolute basic stuff we need. We could wrap our hyperlinks around in here so that we can link off to other pages and work from there. And so right now it can handle any number of slides. Unscripted testing. I'm going to add another 2 slides to it just to prove my sanity. Let's replace that with 4. Everything still works as expected. Alright, so that wraps up our cut out of the site. I'm going to do another video on how we can optimize some of these. Won't actually perform all the optimizations, but show you how something you could do for various items to help improve your performance. So thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to add any feedback, and we'll see you on the next one.